Oh, yay.
All right, so we're gonna make some pasta sauce again from our garden using two types of tomatoes. So we have the smaller Roma tomatoes. So these are good because they're not as moist as most other tomatoes, so they're really good for making a thick sauce like you use on pasta or pizza. And then we're going to use early girl tomatoes, which are a small little red table tomato. So altogether we've got about 6.5, 7 pounds of tomatoes, mixed half and half between Roma and early girl. Went ahead and already peeled a entire head of garlic. And then for seasonings, really simple on this, we'll just use a little bit of onion powder, a little bit of dried basil, because our fresh basil's all used up right now. If we're using fresh basil, we'd probably use a 1/4 cup. With this, probably just a couple tablespoons for a batch of sauce this size. And then a generic Italian seasoning. And this will have a little bit more basil in it, but also like your oregano, marjoram, thyme, just some of the other spices you find in any like normal marinara or spaghetti sauce. And use about a tablespoon of this in there. And we'll use the food processor to blend everything up for consistency. That'll get you this nice consistency like this, a nice thick sauce that you can use for either pizza or pasta. And then once we finish blending everything up, we'll throw it into our Instant Pot and cook it on a low temperature for 6 to 8 hours. And after that, we'll go ahead and we'll put it into some jars, seal it up, and it can either be refrigerated for 2 weeks, or if we jar it, seal it, and boil it, then you could actually store it on a shelf for a year. But today we're just going to plan on doing everything refrigerated, since we're eating tomatoes as fast as we grow them right now. And other than that, we'll just start going. So we'll start with the garlic, make sure that we get a good mince on that. This is why using the food processor is so nice, because we just took an entire head of garlic and completely minced it with no effort. Make it nice and even. And then from there, we're just going to start adding in our tomatoes. So whenever you're making a sauce like this, it's important not to fill the processor all the way to the top, or you're going to push sauce out everywhere. So you fill it up about maybe 2/3 of the way, leave space. And then what that's going to leave us with is a nice, smooth, evenly blended sauce. The reason it looks a little pink right now is all the air bubbles from the food processor. After that cooks and settles, it'll go right back down to this normal pasta sauce color. So all the white in there is just from air bubbles. So if you have larger tomatoes that won't fit around the blade, then you cut those in half. But all of our early girls grew in pretty small, so that makes this a little bit easier. So it's a little bit less prep work. Also make sure beforehand you go through, remove any stems, remove any rotten areas or anything that might get nibbled on by something in the garden that might have snuck past you when you harvested it. Thing, nice smooth consistency. This is a larger food processor, so it does 8 cups at a time. So you can probably puree about a pound and a half of tomatoes at a time in here. So that makes this a little bit easier going. And then this batch will add our seasonings to it. So we'll add about a tablespoon of just a basic Italian seasoning. So this is going to be a combination of oregano, marjoram, thyme, basil, rosemary, and sage. About a tablespoon's worth. We'll add a little bit of onion powder. So since we're making a sauce, adding fresh onion and then mincing it's going to add too much water. So it's just a little bit easier to just use some onion powder. Don't use onion salt, because if you use onion salt, it's going to be so salty you're not going to want to eat it. So, like I said, the reason to do the onion powder here is just fresh onion would add too much water to this. The tomatoes are already really juicy, and you want to make sure that we want to cook it down over 6 or 8 hours to make a nice thick sauce. We don't want it too watery. And then we'll use some dried basil. So normally we've been using fresh basil, but we're making sauce faster than we can grow basil right now. So we'll use the dried instead. If we had fresh basil, we'd probably use a 1/4 cup of leaves. Since we're out of fresh basil, we use the dried basil, about 2 tablespoons worth. This will be our batch with the seasoning in it. We'll add to the pot. One of the reasons I like to do this not in the last batch is sometimes you'll have your seasonings stick to the inside of this. So if you do 1 or 2 more batches in the food processor afterwards, then make sure you get all your seasoning in there, all your herbs, spices. Some people will add salt to their sauce. I don't generally like to do that because when you add salt in, you never know quite how it's going to turn out. You can always add salt at the end. So if I do add salt, I usually add it at the end of the cook. Because otherwise, if you add salt, you can't take it away. Plus, keep in mind if you're going to add any sort of cheese to this when you go to serve it, or if you add sausage or any sort of meats, a lot of times those will have a lot of salt in them. So it's always best for your sauce, unless you're just doing strictly a vegetarian sauce, add your salt at the end right before you go to serve it, maybe 20 minutes beforehand. That's a little over 7 pounds of fresh tomatoes from our garden. So you can already see the color is starting to become a little bit more red, like a regular sauce. Still pretty watery. So that's why we're going to put it into our Instant Pot. So pressure cooker, all-birth cooker. We'll put it in there to simmer first, bring it to a low boil for about 20 minutes. And that's just to make sure we sterilize everything. Just keep in mind this did come out of our garden, so we're not using any pesticides, but we're also not using any cleaning chemicals and all organic fertilizers. So you always want to make sure you cook it to a boil for 15 or 20 minutes first. Then after that, we set it on a slow cook for the next 6 to 8 hours. That'll reduce it down, and that'll be enough to make about 2 full jars this size. This is a 64-ounce jar, so this will give us at least a gallon of sauce when we're all said and done. Yeah, and this will be what your finished product's like. But like I said, we've already gone into this, and to give you an idea, I mean, this is a 64-ounce jar. From that, we've already made 2 pizzas out of it. So I mean, this would be enough sauce to do probably a dozen pizzas. Or if you're going to do spaghetti, probably enough to do 3 or 4 meals out of spaghetti for a group of 4 people. And then that'll be it for now. We'll probably record tomorrow. We're going to let this cook overnight. And then we'll record tomorrow because we'll actually jar and seal and can these, preserve them so we can store them on the shelf. And that'll be a little bit different operation. So we'll show you that tomorrow. That's it.
Okay.
Approved by Sierra. Bye. Push the button.